beautiful opportunity to entertain the audience, right? So that's what we're supposed to do. And let me start off with throwing a topic at you that is currently having the potential to be a game changer. No, let me do that. We all are able to read every day in the news, we can follow it, the situation in Ukraine, yeah? Now, in theory, you could say, well, another broken state, we have so many, who cares, yeah? To be very, very rough. In this case, it is a lot about energy, it's a lot about natural gas, and you may argue, actually, it's natural gas that has caused the trouble. Russia has been supplying cheap natural gas into Ukraine as long as we can think. The Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, as we all know, and has inherited a very, very inefficient energy consumption pattern. And it was living quite well with cheap natural gas from Russia till lately. So if I may ask you, Mohammed, to make maybe a little bit, take a bit of risk, you know, and tell us on how you take that and how you see the situation evolving, because there are a lot of implications. We don't need to talk about the political, but if we talk about what does it mean for the energy markets, I think there is a great forum.
You had to do a very political question for me.
Yeah, sure.
If I can just be very pragmatic on this particular point of view, I mean, you have to look at two sides of the coin. I mean, at the end of the day, basically, Russia has been a very good supplier of gas into Europe, and it will remain to be a supplier of gas into Europe. If you look in terms of the percentage, it's I think it supplies something like 163 BCM. Of this, quite a lot of it went through Ukraine. Now, obviously, if a particular country does not pay for the gas, then what does that country do actually? So one way is to say, well, if you don't physically pay, then there could be a risk of a disruption. It's not something that anybody would like to do. But it's a situation, I think you have to look in Russia's point of view, really. It's that it doesn't want to not give the gas, but at the same time, it has its own obligations. So that's my answer in a more political point of view.
Okay. Leo, this is such a hot topic. Maybe you want to take an opposite view, because, you know, we want to see blood.
Well, I'm not so sure about blood, but I'd take it a step back. Russia had obviously had no desire to instigate a crisis that involves gas and oil, because there's oil involved as well. And in a sense, this is a crisis that it really wanted to avoid. And Europe should have avoided as well, especially the European Union, because if we look back, the European Union's an association agreement that it proposed, association relationship with the Ukraine, was where it all started. And Europe has been pushing to try to bring in the Ukraine into its sphere of influence, if you like. Now this not enraged, but excited the anti-view from, as you know, the Russian-speaking part of the Ukraine, and there are quite a lot of Russian speakers, especially in the east. And of course it escalated into a political crisis without either side thinking of the economic implications. And this often happens in political crises, when you forge ahead with either for nationalistic reasons or for other reasons, and don't consider the implications for your economy. And at the end of the day, most people worry first about their livelihoods, their security, and their jobs, and then worry about the great ideological positions taken, or the nationalist positions. But this, so we've stumbled into this crisis, which could have serious implications. And the European Union, I think, on the one hand, should have thought very clearly before it started this push to embrace the Ukraine into a closer association. And of course, President Putin himself reacted to this and has pushed the situation from his side, which might endanger Russia's exports. So both sides, it's in both sides' interest to calm down and rethink what they're doing and to slow this process down completely, not encourage one side or the other. But so far there has not been any serious indication. A slight detail on this, if I may point out, is that the current strategy of the European Union is to provide both financial assistance, $3.5 billion as mentioned, or euros I think, so far, and try to offer gas supplies to the Ukraine to replace what will be soon cut off, because Russia, as you know, has insisted on payment of previous supplies that have not been paid for. The Ukraine is in a state of turmoil. It doesn't have any cash whatsoever. The currency is falling like a stone. So and Europe has promised financial aid to actually basically pay the bill, because the Ukraine will certainly use it to try to keep gas, to get gas back into the storage for the winter. So it's a dangerous situation, and and of course violence has increased now. There are people being shot at on both sides, and Slovakia, through which the gas that the European Union promised would supply the Ukraine, Slovakia has said that it is not keen to do this. We're only talking about, I think, 5 BCM or so, which is really not enough for the Ukraine. But Slovakia has presented obstacles to use its own pipeline system to supply gas. So it's a fraught situation, and I'm sorry we've reached this position, and it's not easy to see how we can get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it also fits into the trend of the last few years. And I'm talking now about the Arab Spring, I'm talking about Middle East, North Africa. We have seen everywhere the desire for freedom, democracy, wealth, going towards a Western standard, which is all well understandable. And of course, people, if you ask them, you want to be part of Europe, they say, of course I want, because they associate with Europe richness, wealth, right, better living. Of course, this is a problem, because at the end of the day, someone has to pay the bills. Now, President Yanukovych did not sign the treaty with Europe because he had to pay $15 billion, and Europe was not ready to give him $15 billion. Putin was ready to give him $15 billion, so the deal was very clear. He goes for that. So then he was kicked out of office. Now the gas price in Ukraine is raised from $268 per 1,000 cubic meter to 86. So that means no friendship discounts. And that means a lot of things. It means, first of all, there's no, nobody is saying thank you that you gave us a discount. But it's not only thank you, it is also opportunistic, right? The fact that Putin took Crimea is also helping him to increase the gas price. As you know, Crimea is since 1964 part of Ukraine. At the time it was also Soviet Union, so nobody cared whether it's part of Ukraine or Russia when Khrushchev gave the Crimea to Ukraine. And since Ukraine became an independent country, Russia is paying for that. The contract that they renewed in 2010 till 2040 for paying for the Sevastopol base of the US naval fleet in the Black Sea means $100 discount on the gas bill, $100. So what Russia now easily was able to do is say, I don't pay you now for using the Sevastopol base because now it's mine. And I think that was a key rationale behind all the issue that a lot of Russian people are living there. So that's why Crimea is now part of Russia. The reason why Eastern Ukraine is not yet part of Russia, and I don't necessarily believe this is going to happen, is There it is much more down to the people in Ukraine that they want to be part of Russia than Russia wanting them. And it's all coming down that you have a heavy steel industry. And this heavy steel industry knows one thing for sure. They're only competitive with cheap natural gas. And having the gas price raised, they know this basically means they're out of jobs. So that these guys don't want to be part of this kind of tendency right now is understandable. But let me ask in the second round, before I open up to the floor for questions, the implications on trade flows. We see Novatek now making the final investment decision on Yamal. We see Rosneft going for more Sakhalin. We see Russia going on oil terms more and more to the east. Maybe, Mohammed, if I may ask you, can you put a bit of a light on how you see the gas flows changing, possibly as a reaction of this kind of cooling in the situation with, between Russia and Europe? Because clearly it's a home run for the US LNG, right? Eastern European countries are all frightened, and US is going to be happy to offer LNG as an alternative. So we hear what Leo said, it's all going to take a lot of time, but we're talking here about a medium-term strategy. So what's going to be, from your point of view, the reaction of Russia in terms of medium-term strategy?
Okay. I think we have to be very careful when we judge countries and what we observe. First of all, I would like to say, do we have the full facts? Point number two, we need to have a look what is physically there in terms of infrastructure, in terms of diversification. If you look at Russia, Russia has done quite a lot actually in terms of supplying into Europe with the Nord Stream. So physically the pipeline is there, point A to point B. So I think the gas is going to come, it's like a third, okay? Now, in terms of trade flow, okay, I think economics will prevail. I don't want to sort of talk into politics. Let's talk about economics. Economics will prevail. So any exporting country, whether it's pipeline or LNG, you will try and find the most premium market. So in terms of a strategy, what will happen progressively, not necessarily because of what is happening in the Ukraine, but I think what will happen is that possibly Russia will try and also find markets into Asia. Before it was concentrating into Europe, but depending on economics, it may shift, it may now increase. I think if you look at the physical dynamics of Asia now with Russia, it's something like 4.5%. I think it wants to go to 10%. So this is, I think, what's going to happen. But still, I would like to say that Russia would, I cannot talk for Russia because we respect the member countries, but in terms of just having physical data, the pipelines are there. You have the North Stream, you have the South Stream potentially coming in 2015, 16. So it makes sense for Russia to give gas to Europe, but at the same time, you have to respect that a country has the right to physically deliver the gas to a premium market.
Leo, President Putin, I think, is now visiting Beijing these days, and what everyone is expecting, watching that, they have agreed on several visits previously on signing a gas deal. And as an analyst, we always have been waiting, where's the price? Yeah? They never could agree on the price. Would you expect him now to make a breakthrough on that?
Well, again, it's a question of what price and what is it based on. As you know, the Far East so far has been signing these long-term contracts based on oil prices. The Japanese, we know, are not happy with this situation, but they are sticklers for contracts themselves, so they are honoring them, but they don't want to sign any new ones on that basis. So there will be a change, I think, in the future in terms of the way prices are agreed upon. And I think there will be a lot more spot gas traded. I think the question was raised earlier with your presentation. And the gas market, I'll come back to the Russian side, but the gas market will slowly and has been following in the footsteps, so to speak, of oil. The reason that it has not gone faster is because of these long-term contracts. But ultimately, when there is an excess supply of gas, LNG I mean at the moment, not pipeline gas, around the world, which will happen at some stage or another, and with the US coming in as well. There are independent there's independent transportation, that there are owners who build LNG vessels, and they are building them now for spot trade, not connected with the supply chains as before. The investments are large, but people are taking a risk. And my own country, Greek ship owners are leading in this, as they led in oil before. So there will come a time when a lot of spot gas will be available, and that's the time when the gas business decouples from oil and it follows its own future. And personally, I think this will be a good thing for the world as a whole. Coming back to Russia, I think there are plans, you might correct me if I'm wrong, to have this big pipeline, gas pipeline, heading across Siberia and ending up in the Far East. I don't know what happens thereafter, but will there be an LNG terminal to take it further from there? I don't know. Maybe pipelines crossing to Japan, etc. But certainly that is the strategic plan, is to follow the oil pipelines across Siberia with gas ones, to shift, to answer your question, away from the West, where Russia sees problems, political problems, and also shifting east to gain from the higher prices that are prevailing there. For example, in Japan, the current landed price of LNG, I think, is over $18 per million BTU. The European price at the moment is around $10, $12 per million BTU. And in the US, we have the Henry Hub at 4.4. So there's a great disparity between these three major prices, and the reason it stays that way is because obviously there are few arbitrage opportunities. The US is isolated. Europe has linked with oil and is tied up with the pipelines bringing gas to the West. And the Far East, the Japanese in particular, but also the Koreans, very much concerned about security of supply. They always have been. I think it's in their psyche, and they want to be sure that they get supplies. So this is what has caused this disparity in prices. But over time, just to conclude, I have a feeling that as more and more spot gas becomes available, people build ships on spec, and the trade will resemble oil, and there will be a meeting of gas prices round about, I'd say, $10, $15 per million BTU, probably not more than that.
I like the Greek perspective of the tanker market, because that's something I have not monitored, and that is very interesting. But Mohammed, in his presentation, told us that in short term we should expect a rather tight market, and obviously a spot market to really become relevant requires surplus capacity, so that's all going to be tough to see. Now, Russia has already moved 1/3 of its oil into Asia. We'll see what that means for natural gas. Now, may I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to join in with your questions and to challenge our great speakers here. Okay, microphone in front row, please. No, sorry, front row first. Yeah, here, front row for me. Sorry, you come second, right? I'm looking for an orderly market.
Anwar Khalafa from Bahrain. My question is to Leo. You know, the whole, the biggest change in the market is the shale gas in the United States. We are building so much on this to the extent that we have forgotten in my opinion, the fundamentals that, you know, the sustainability of the shale gas production at the current Henry Hub prices is going to fade out. You know, with what you have explained in the presentation, that the coal-fired power stations are going to be closing down. they have chosen to take that route. So, just looking at the problem, you can foresee that the prices of gas in the United States will not stay at the current level. And this will throw some doubt on whether the United States can really be re-exporting LNG to the rest of the world. So we have put all our analysis or conclusions on the fact that shale gas will continue, will be sustainable at the current prices, which is, to me, I don't truly say.
Well, thank you. You've just reinforced what was the theme of my presentation, which is that we ought to be cautious about these claims that shale gas will transform the world. As I showed you, in the United States already this is happening. Demand has surged for gas, and supplies are not rising as before. The price effects in the US are quite clear. Rigs, as I said, have moved to oil, which is, it's more lucrative to drill for oil, shale oil I mean, than gas at the moment, and they are shifting. So gas supplies are not rising at the rate they did before. A few years ago, now they're actually completely static. The cautionary tale is there for anyone who knows the story of LNG in the United States, or rather the lack of LNG, because they had, I think it was 15 to 20 regasification terminals only a few years ago. And now some of them are being converted again at huge cost to LNG terminals. The biggest mistake in the United States was made when they thought that the gas demand would carry on rising and their gas supplies before fracking would diminish, and therefore they needed to import large amounts of gas, which they had to, LNG, would import and regasify it. Now there's so much gas that everyone says, there are all these applications. So we should be careful about going overboard, both as analysts and, more importantly, as investors. I would worry about all this, the 25 LNG terminals. The resources there in the United States, but as we economists keep reminding people in the oil and gas business that the development of oil and gas is not a geological issue, it's an economic issue. And if the prices are right, people will invest, and if the future is clear, which it never is, then people will invest. But if it's not, then you do it at your peril. And I've been a long time in the oil industry, as Johannes introduced me, 37 years. I've seen so many ups and downs and so many mistakes made, including my former company BP, where back in the 80s, the price crises of the 70s and early 80s, for some reason and I was in corporate planning, they thought that what this means is that we must diversify. And the company bought supermarkets and animal feed businesses and so on, coal and minerals and so on and so forth, which they all sold at a loss. That were all sold 10 years later.
Mohammed, what's your take on the shale?
Yep, a very good question. What I'd like to do is maybe to shed light and put some numbers, okay? Because also in the slide that I had given, I was saying about shale gas predominantly being in America and what's its impact. And I think sometimes we tend to overexcite. Let me clarify my point. Okay, let's start with Japan. If we take the import bill of Japan of 2013 and just take an average price, you'll find it to be, if my numbers are correct, around 15.8 for 2013. So just please have this number in your mind. Now, what's the NBP price in Europe? Predominantly, if I can just give a range, it's between $9 to $12. So you have 15.8 in Japan is like a reference. Europe, NBP, let's say around between 9 to let's say 12. Okay, now let's move on to America, the shale gas production. And I even gave you how much that was in terms of percentage. Now, if you take Henry Hub right now, 4.5, let's say it's $5.
Yeah.
It's $5, okay? And add the layers. Let's add risk gasification, $3, okay? 5 plus 3, that's 8. And then you add another part in terms of shipping. You'll find that it comes out to be very close to what is in the NBP price, okay? So you can see where is all this fuss about. So again, I support my colleague here. Let's look at the numbers, please. And you can see this gives us some reality to this shale gas issue.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now I'd like to pass the microphone to the gentleman in the back.
This is Hamid Siddiqui. Johannes, I have met you many times.
Hamid,
in
it's good
Saudi
to see you.
Arabia.
Hey, how are you?
I have some comments and then a question. My comments from yesterday's presentation and today is, can the US shale success story can be repeated in the rest of the world? That's always a big discussion. My comments are that US situation is inherently different. It's not that US industry is much smarter than the others, or there are different geologic or engineering reasons. I think the basic difference is US has a free enterprise system where individuals, mom and pop companies can really strive and look for shale oil and gas. Whereas in rest of the world, if you discover resources, it belongs to your government, and you have to go through agencies and ministries to get permission to do that. And also, the environmental resistance that you have in other places, you have that in US also. But because of the free enterprise system, people are more enterprising and willing to take risk at much lower operating cost, and they succeed. Whereas the rest of the world do not have the same business and economic model. Government agencies, ministries, and environmental agencies do not allow to take risk. And that's why I think the shale success story will have tough time gaining the success they had in US. Having said that, do you think US is in a position to supply LNG to balance the Ukraine crisis or to compensate for the high prices that you have in rest of the world? Because I think there's sufficient resistance to not to allow the prices to go higher in US.
Hamid, thank you for the question. I'd like to ask about the replication of the shale success story to Mohammed, and asking you about commenting afterwards, Leo, on the import from US LNG into Eastern Europe. Okay? Mohammed, go ahead.
Okay. Very good question. Okay, let's try and take this apart. Okay, as you know, basically shale gas production, okay, if you look at last year, it's America. And if you look at China, there was a little bit of China with CNPC, which is about 0.73, but that was not really for commercial use. It was more of a pilot, okay? So it's a very good question whether we can replicate. And you actually answered part of the question yourself. You need to have a look at the actual topography, the geo structure. If you look at America, it's a lot easier than if you look at some of the Sichuan basin. Okay, it's more difficult, like when you start drilling, I think in America, not that I'm actually a geologist, but what I can tell you is in America, it was a lot easier to do than it is in China. Whereas I think China, it's taken like several months just to drill one well. So that's part of the answer. Then you asked whether some of the shale gas could go into Europe. I think if I was to rewind to what I had said to you in terms of the pricing layers, the price is really not that much. And the Americans, when they do come on stream, which will be in 2015, it's not now, it's been past, this is the most advanced. There's basically, I think, 6 projects coming in. And if you take some of these 6 projects, it's around between, I think about 60 metric tons per annum coming in. So it's not going to be like a major impact. It is going to help, but it's not a major impact, okay? Now, again, using economics, 3-4 years down the road, will Europe still be the premium market? Will it be Asia? So of course the Americans would go for the most premium market. So this is where I would like to stop and maybe hand over to you.
Brief.
If I may just make a slightly different point, I agree with you about the dynamic enterprise in the United States, the mama and papa type of operation. But I think you didn't point out that there's one deeper reason for the great success of the U.S. Shale gas and oil revolution, by the way, is the legal structure of the United States, the mineral resources of the United States. In non-federal land, these belong to the individual, and it cannot be stressed as too much in comparison with most of the rest of the world, where the subsoil mineral resources and oil and gas are considered mineral resources, belong to the state, in theory at least. In practice, they do not.
Leo, is it going to be more a matter of geology, whether, for instance, in Poland, shale gas will succeed, or is it more about regulatory environment?
In Poland, you mentioned ExxonMobil has drilled a well, I think, and it's been disappointing. Shale gas well.
Yeah.
So
a lot of places in Europe, you have to drill very much deeper.
Deeper, and the infrastructure is not there. Incidentally, the United States is crisscrossed. If you look at a map of oil and gas pipelines, crisscrossed by pipelines, the infrastructure has been developed over, I'd say, maybe a century, or more even in some cases. So it's quite possible to link up quite cheaply into gas and oil systems, whereas in Europe we do not have this infrastructure.
We have to leave it there. We have to go for a break, because if we don't go to the break now, we won't come back from the break. If we don't come back from the break, our next three speakers will have no lunch, and we will be at lunch and they will have no audience. So anyway, I thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Let's give an applause to our two speakers. Thanks, guys. Good to see you. Leo, good.